Dr. Sandra Stotsky is here from Boston. She has her doctorate from Harvard University, and she's Professor Emerita from the University of Arkansas. She is an author with many books and many articles, which she can share with you. She has served on the National Validation Common Core Committee and was one of the 5 people who refused to sign off on the Common Core standards. She set Massachusetts academic standards for K-12 students, and she was part of the National Assessment of Educational Progress Reading Assessments. Sandra is known nationwide and globally for her in-depth analysis of the problems in Common Core's English language standards. Dr. Cynthia McDermott is professor and department chair at Antioch University. She previously taught in the Cal State University system, and she's a Fulbright scholar doing grants, and she has research credits. Dr. Walter Ulrich, sitting over here, is from Cal State Fresno, from the Kremen School of Education and Human Development. He coordinates the Master of Arts in Teaching program, and his PhD is in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Wisconsin. And we have our first school board member ever elected on an anti-Common Core campaign from Modesto, California, Mr. John Walker. John is the first school board member who's run on this campaign platform and was seated in November 2015. John works for NASA in the research and development of air traffic control software at UC Santa Cruz. So we have a very distinguished group today, and I hope you take the heed and listen, and each is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll take questions. So I'm going to ask Dr. Stotsky to talk first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would ask about a minute before I am ready to have my time stop that you let me know, wave something, so otherwise I can go on for a long time. First of all, what do we use standards for? Why are they important to begin with? There are 4 major uses for standards. This is what I did with them in Massachusetts, and that helped to get us to the top on all National Assessment of Educational Progress tests, grade 4, grade 8, reading and math, and also in grade 8 on science on TIMSS, the only international test of the curriculum, Trends in International Mathematics and Science Survey. So we knew that we had good standards and good backup for them because it's not standards alone. Standards are good for classroom curriculum development. That's the first major use of good standards. Second, for teacher preparation programs. Third, for professional development criteria. And then fourth, and finally, for student tests. But you have to have all the other pieces in place first before you go to student tests. That's why I was very unhappy with that part of Common Core, because they did everything backwards, including their procedures, which went from creating standards which were not standards and then going right to student tests, and we have seen the disaster without going to the teacher piece of it, which is critical, and that was what I had spent a lot of time in Massachusetts on. Now, why had I, among the 5 other members of the Common Core Validation Committee, which was to justify or to see whether Common Core standards were justified, 09 to 10, and Professor Milgram from Stanford, who looked at the math standards, and I, who looked at the ELA standards, both agreed that the standards that we would not sign off on were not worth signing off on because they were not research-based, internationally benchmarked, or rigorous. Now, I have given you a handout that you, or at least it's available over there, so that you could see what you lost, because you lost in California when Common Core's standards were adopted in place of what you had before. You lost what were considered the gold standard in math and science. California had the best standards in math and science in the country. English was as good as what we had in Massachusetts. History was, I would like to say, almost as good as what we had in Massachusetts, but you lost just about all of your good standards. Now, if you look at what I put on this 2-page handout, I just gave you a few examples of what was in the vocabulary strand from your 97 document in ELA. You're going to get more on math and science from John Walker later on. And then I'm giving you a few examples of ELA standards. I'm only going to read one of them so that you can get a sense of what a real standard is, which is what you had in your old standards. One of them, 3.7, says contrast the major literary forms, techniques, and characteristics of the major literary periods, for example, Homeric Greece, medieval, romantic, neoclassic, modern. This is for grades 11 and 12, for students who are completing high school and will be ready for authentic college level work. Now, what do you have when you go to Common Core standards for 11, 12? You can see all of the different possibilities there, one of which is, and I'll just read it so that you can see that it's basically a skill and not a standard, because it doesn't indicate literary periods or movements, which helps to guide the teacher for where the teacher will select text. That's local control. But the standards guide where you go to make sure that students who are in high school read high school level material before they go to college. Sounds sort of common sense, but this has been lost in Common Core. You have, for example, analyze, this is number 3, analyze the impact of the author's choices regarding how to develop and relate elements of a story or drama, where a story is set, how the action is ordered, how the characters are introduced and developed. You could do that with the 3 Little Pigs as well as with Moby Dick. There's nothing in that statement of skills that pins you to a period of time, to a reading level. You can have almost anything that is chosen by a tester or by a teacher to satisfy the analysis according to whatever skill is being developed. You can't do that with the real standards that you have unfortunately lost. So you've lost your gold standard standards in all areas. And what does it matter? It matters for selective colleges that you might want your kids to go to, for STEM careers, which, as I say, you'll hear more from John Walker on. It matters for one of the biggest claims to come out of Common Core, that it develops critical thinking. Well, it can't develop critical thinking because they're not concentrating in any way on a knowledge base, and you can't think in an intellectual vacuum. You have to know something in order to think. So students today are going to come out incapable of doing the kind of critical thinking or even the analytical thinking which precedes critical thinking that you might want truly college-ready students to be able to do. So you have basically dumbed down standards today that are Common Core, and what you will get from them is not the equalization of educational opportunity, which is part of the sales pitch. You will actually get a growth in the gaps, the demographic gaps, plus a loss of local control. So what are parents doing across the country, and that some parents are doing more and more of here, and as you heard mentioned, opting out. Opting out is a parent's right. It's not something that you ask permission for. And I've been going around to 35 states telling legislators and parents that parents for hundreds of years in this country, whether you were part of the colonies in New England or part of territories in the West, you have the right to opt out your child from any state or federally mandated test, just as you had the right to keep them home if they had the measles, or keep them home if you wanted to go on a vacation, as I knew parents back in Brookline, Massachusetts, where I live, have often done for years and years and years. So opting out is your right. You don't have to ask permission. There is no statute in any state set of statutes that says parents must submit their minor children to a federal or state mandated test. Couldn't be. And people who developed Common Core know that opting out is the Achilles heel of the entire Common Core project. Because if enough parents take their kids out, you make the tests invalid. And this is what is happening today in Long Island, where report yesterday was over half the kids were opted out by their parents in Long Island. Of course, there are all kinds of attempts to bully those parents to get them to have makeup tests that their children are involved in, but the parents can refuse makeup tests. And as we were told by our own commissioner in Massachusetts, every parent in any state has the right to request an appropriate instructional setting on the day of a test that they don't want their child to take, if it is a mandated federal and state test. We're not suggesting you opt out of teacher-made tests, because that's a whole different ballgame and story. But you can certainly opt out of federally required or state-required tests, and request that your local school board make sure your superintendent and your school personnel provide alternative, appropriate instructional settings. Why does that matter? Because some school systems in some states have become punitive. Kids are sent out to the playground for the hour, or they're required to sit and stare at a computer for an hour, or they're put into an empty room and not given anything to do. That's inappropriate, and that would be a question of child abuse that they would face a lawsuit for. So you have that weapon of opting out to send a signal that you will not put up with inferior standards and an inferior system of education for your students. The other parental weapon, which has been growing like leaps and bounds but is not easily done by a lot of parents, is homeschooling. Within the past 10 years, about twice as many kids are being homeschooled, and homeschool cooperatives are beginning to develop, which is like an alternative public school system, except that they don't get any money. Where the tax credits fit in, we don't know yet. Let me go to the topic of college admissions tests, because that's going to be the problem facing homeschoolers that they don't quite know how to resolve yet. And even those behind the Common Core project haven't quite decided how to handle homeschoolers who should be taking some sort of college admission test. SAT, ACT, the usual college admission tests have all been, quotes, aligned to Common Core, which means they've been dumbed down to the level of Common Core. As a result, you could almost predict that in this country, there are 2 new college admission tests that have just been developed and will be piloted this year. One of them I have been asked to review. It's by Catholic colleges for students who want to apply to Catholic colleges. So they've developed their own admission test that has high school level reading on the test passages, because that's what they expect. The other, I can't give you details on because I wasn't asked to review that one, but there may be more that will be coming down the pike to claim that they are college admissions tests that more and more colleges may accept in place of the SBAC, Smarter Balanced, or PARC, the other grade 11 college readiness test, that is claiming that they have developed college readiness tests that can predict whether your child is going to be ready for college or career. You have to listen to this to think about it. And at the same time, because USED has given permission for this to take place, these tests can also be used as achievement tests. It's like having a toothbrush that can also brush your shoes and comb your hair at the same time. Any testing expert, and I've spoken to some, Richard Phelps is one, who will say that no test in grade 11 can serve more than one good purpose. And predict. I've got 1 minute to wrap up. Okay. So you have to just remember that a test that claims it can assess achievement in high school and predict readiness for a career, readiness for college, all at the same time is an invalid test. There's going to be a lawsuit about that one when it happens. But this is how desperate the situation is for what is basically a dying movement, Common Core, but it's going to die a slow, painful, and costly death as it moves across the country and your children are involved. What can parents do? They can certainly opt their children out and just tell the school. Number two, they can ask their local school board here in California to use the STAR test, which I've been told is available at a very inexpensive cost if they want to do that here. Perhaps John Walker can say more about that. I can't give you more details on the STAR. As long as the school doesn't give credit-bearing alternatives, which are not legal, as I understand it, to students who opt out, and the school says, well, we're going to give them 7 essays to do as an alternative to taking the test. So there are things that parents can do to send a message, and I think we should all try to imitate the Long Island parents who have sent a big message to the New York State Commissioner. Over half the kids have opted out, and the New York State Commissioner of Ed is now busy running around the state saying, well, we have shortened the test. We have made sure that teachers aren't going to be evaluated by the test. What more can we do to get you to take the test? And so I'm